fog in Dubai. That is actually true. I was in fog. And I'm 4 hours late. And that actually is a nice segue into my talk, because I want to talk about happiness in relation to one of the scarcest resources that we all have. In fact, the most scarce resource that each of us has, and that's our time. I'm going to talk for 20 minutes. It's going to be a journey of humour and intelligence and everything else beyond, but you're 20 minutes closer to death when I finish speaking. And you're not going to get that time back. You can beg, borrow and steal money, but you can't get time back that's lost. So I think it's incumbent on us as individuals and as policymakers, I'll talk a bit more about policy later on, to help ourselves and other people use time in ways that bring them the greatest happiness. And actually, in my experience of 2 or more decades around policymakers, they don't actually spend a lot of time thinking about time. They spend a lot of time thinking about the big ticket items in people's lives, housing, education and income, all of which are hugely important and powerful determinants of an individual's happiness, at least in small doses, maybe not in extreme. But very little time is spent on how we can nudge people and help people use time in ways that make them happier. And so in Happiness by Design, there's my first plug for the book. It didn't take me long. The subtitle to the UK version, I'll talk about the US version later, is Finding Pleasure and Purpose in Everyday Life. And so I argue, and I've got a couple of slides, they're nowhere near as good as Mike's. There it is. That's brilliant though, isn't it? See, that's what an academic does. That's how I draw. So a lot of what we think we know about happiness comes from asking people global evaluation questions. Overall, how satisfied am I with my life these days? And people give us answers to those questions, and we make inferences about what makes them happy. Now, I could spend a long time discussing the pros and cons of those measures, but one thing that they don't allow us to do is to measure accurately, in any meaningful sense, how people use their time as they go about their daily activities. And so the subtitle to the UK book, Finding Pleasure and Purpose in Everyday Life. And I think that's where we ought to be paying much more attention in both our measures and in what we make as policy implications that follow from the use of those measures. Much more attention paid to how people use their time. And actually that's important, because when we look at, it's nearly always correlations, we do try to establish some causal mechanisms by statistical inference, but that's quite difficult. When we look at the correlations, let's say with the things that you'd expect to be correlated with income and that you know, with happiness, and that you know are correlated with life satisfaction. Age. Now age, I'm sure many of you will know and have seen, has a U-shape in life satisfaction. Middle-aged men like me are about as miserable as we can get. I can look forward, insofar as I don't die, I can look forward to my life satisfaction improving in the next couple of years and then up to about 6 months prior to actually dying. But actually, when we look at experience-based data, that is asking people questions about how they feel in the moment, in the activities that they engage in as they go about their daily lives, we get something quite different. We actually don't get much of an association at all. When we look at income, now again, most of you will know that life satisfaction effects of income tail off relatively quickly. In experience-based data, again, when we ask people what they're doing, how they're feeling, how they're using their time, and how they feel when they're using their time in those ways, we actually find something very interesting from some US data, and that is not only does happiness not increase with income, it actually starts to fall in the highest income groups. Highest income groups has lower happiness in their activities than those with less than the highest income. Education. Now, I imagine, I don't know, hands up if you have a PhD. Complete waste of time. Should probably have stopped at a BSc or maybe a master's. There are huge selection effects, of course, and I don't want to say anything causal about this, but the most miserable group by education category in these US data are those with PhDs. So, well, I don't know why I should laugh at you. I have one as well. So, we get some different associations if we look at experience-based data compared to evaluations. And I think that's important, and it gives us another way of thinking about policy and what we can do to help people lead happier lives. I argue in Happiness by Design that we should be not thinking only about experiences that are fun and bring us pleasure, but also absolutely critically are experiences that feel fulfilling and bring us purpose. And actually, most of what has been written about in the literature, or at least in measurement for as long as we've been measuring happiness, hasn't actually done very much to capture purpose as an experience. It's done a lot in asking me to think about, when I reflect upon my life, how much meaning do I think it has? And I can tell all sorts of stories about that. But actually nothing very much about the granularity of the experiences, right? So I can reflect upon my life as a father and say that my life is meaningful and purposeful, but what matters, arguably more, is actually how much pleasure and purpose I experience when I'm with my children, when I'm not with them, when I'm thinking about them, when I'm engaged in activities with them. And actually, children, as anyone will know if they have children, are a very good example of activities, things, circumstances of life that bring a hell of a lot of purpose and hardly any pleasure. Children, if we only looked at pleasure, any happiness maximizer would go nowhere near children, would go nowhere near having children. That's an important clarification. Because, tiny moments of joy, just enough to stop you killing them, with huge doses of stress and anxiety and worry. But there is something, at least I think I've experienced something different as a parent, that feels worthwhile. Teaching my kids the timetables when they're not very quick at it, helping them tie their shoelaces. These are things that are purposeful activities. And my life is maybe not any happier overall than prior to having children, but it's differently happy. And as I get older, that's probably no bad thing. Now, you don't have to have children to find purpose. Of course, a lot of people will find purpose in work. Can I just, is that the that's the time. Oh my God, it's actually counting down. I've just seen that. Does this explode at the end of the 20 minutes? I'm gonna see if I go on for 1 second longer to see what happens to me on stage. So you can, of course, and many of us do, find purpose in work. So one of the things that's I think absolutely critical, particularly when we start talking about policy implications, is to think about ways in which we can help individuals and companies and society engage workers. Because actually, you know what? No one likes wasting time, right? There's nothing worse than being in work and feeling like you're doing something that's not worthwhile. And that's where experiences of purpose are absolutely critical and fundamental. And actually, some of what we can do is very quick, very simple, very easy, and hugely effective. Like, give someone feedback in a timely and salient way that their work is worthwhile and meaningful. But the number of companies and organizations that will have lots of experience of working with them, that will start a project or start launching a product or service, and it will get terminated or changed. There'll be no feedback to the workers that anything they've been doing to that point has been valuable. Completely demotivating for the staff, not because they want to have fun at work, but because they want to experience purpose. And actually, there's some evidence that shows that if you try to intervene in work with fun at work, pleasurable activities in workplace, quite rightly most often workers see through that as a very cynical attempt to increase productivity and respond in an adverse way to the bouncy castle that you've put on at the fete at the weekend. You probably don't go outside to have bouncy castles. That probably means nothing to people in Dubai. At 50 degrees Celsius, you probably don't jump up and down outside. Anyway, no, the fun activities are not particularly helpful in workplaces, but purposeful activities are, and helping people find ways to engage with their activities are hugely significant. So, with my slides, have I got 2 slides? Oh, I can see that one. There we go. There's the second one. I don't ever use slides, by the way, when I do talks. And they got very nervous about me not doing that. So they wanted a couple of slides, so I gave them 2 slides. But then they said that I didn't have to use them. Well, I didn't know what, that's a huge challenge. I had no idea what to do, so I decided to use them. So the first one, Pleasure and purpose. Now, it really, again, I just want to finish this to move on to the second half of the talk in a very timely fashion, is to say that your balance between pleasure and purpose will be unique to you. And it's for you to work out what the right balance is. It's not for me to prescribe how much pleasure and purpose you should have in your life. And of course, lots of activities will bring both, right? But certainly when activities bring neither, you should seriously question whether they're worth doing. Now, one thing I could potentially prescribe is to the PhDs in the room, is that I'm pretty convinced that most of you probably have a lot of purpose in your life. It's okay to have a bit of fun as well. It won't kill you. Oh, actually, it might. But if it does, at least you'll die happy. But have some pleasure. And lots of people, of course, have jobs and occupations where they don't have a lot of purpose in work and in life and have a lot of pleasure. So I think there are things that we can at least start nudging people towards activities that help them find the right balance that works uniquely for them. Okay, all good? Happy? For experiencing purpose anyway, at least if not pleasure. Right, now, second part, they asked me to do two things. They asked me to do two things in 20 minutes, and I'm going to try to do both of those things. One is to say, what is happiness? I've been clear about that. Pleasure and purpose over time. All of those three words are critical, pleasure and purpose over time. Secondly, what can policymakers do about it? Well, there are lots of things policymakers can do. They don't often do very many of them well. But I want to give you a way of looking at, or a lens through which to consider whether policymakers do this well or not. And I alluded to earlier the US subtitle to the book. When Happiness by Design was about to go to press with Finding Pleasure and Purpose as its title, as its subtitle, my US editor said, you know what, they won't get that in the US. They need to be told what to do. They need to be more directed. So the US subtitle to Happiness by Design is change what you do, not how you think. Change what you do, not how you think. And so it's in, not surprisingly, given that I've mentioned time use earlier, it's in the activities that we engage in our daily lives. It's about doing things and paying attention to things that make us feel good, rather than changing the way you think about things. Because anyone, I'm sure there's many, hands up if you bought a self-help book. Go on, be honest. I bet that there's so many more people that bought self-help books. Hands up if you bought more than one self-help book. Yeah, okay. So the biggest single factor predicting buying a self-help book is having bought a self-help book in the last 12 months. Now, clearly, I would say that suggests that self-help books are a fantastic market, but not particularly successful. Because what they nearly always do is give you prescriptions about how you should change how you think. Right, be more positive. Yeah, I kind of worked that out. How do I actually do it? And of course, you don't get any implementation tools, and you're made more miserable because you can't do it. Then you go and buy another self-help book. Changing how you think about things and changing your minds about things and changing the public's minds in relation to policy interventions is notoriously difficult. Anybody who's been involved in policy at all in any way knows that changing people's minds through education and information programs, for example, is very hard. I almost swore then for the first time. Very hard. And it's especially hard on precisely the kinds of people that you want those education and information programs to work on. The least educated and least informed to begin with. So every single education policy and information policy in the history of public policy anywhere in the world, I would say, without exception, has served to widen the gap between the better educated and the less educated, the better informed and the less informed. By definition, it must. So you don't change behaviours and happiness through getting people to think differently, or at least it's hard to do that. You change what they do, not how they think. And how do you change what they do? Well, here's the simple behavioural science 101 lesson, right? Very, very simple, 3 words, make it easy. Right? They are the 3 words that any policy should do. If you want someone to do something, make it easy. If you don't want someone to do something, make it hard. And that is true for you as an individual and as you as a policymaker. Now, about 8 years ago now, 9 years ago, just before the coalition was formed in the UK, I was seconded into the Cabinet Office to help set up the Nudge Unit in the UK. And we produced a report called Mindspace, MINDSPACE, which is a 9-letter mnemonic or checklist for interventions that influence people in ways that don't necessarily, I mean, there's a mix in there, that don't necessarily require you to change their minds about things. It's about changing the environment and the situation and the context within which people act to nudge them to behave differently, to be happier, rather than to shove them or to inform them and educate them and keep banging on about what they should do differently. So there you see the 9 effects. Of course, I haven't got any time to go through those in any detail. Some of those you will be familiar with from other speakers. Cass Sunstein earlier, I was in fog, but may well have mentioned norms. It's a very powerful effect. So we want to be like people like us. Right? We're social animals. We're wired to take cues for our behaviour from other people. So if you want to change your own behaviour in a certain way, or if you as a policymaker want to change people's behaviour in certain ways, show them, inform them, give them information and salience on the fact that lots of people like them are behaving in that way. So very successful intervention in the UK on tax compliance to get people to pay more taxes. Very successful interventions in the US and UK, some of which we've been involved in, to get people to use less energy in their houses, is to tell them, in the case of tax, 94% of people pay their taxes on time. You are in a small minority of people who do not. That's actually really quite interesting. Adding that you are in a small minority of people who do not is really significant. Drawing attention to the fact that they're different from the 94% has a significant effect on their tax compliance. Telling people you are a very high energy user compared to people living in similar sized houses. Massive effect on energy consumption. People don't want to be different from people that they want to be alike. So you can think about many examples that you can think about in your own lives as individuals when you're trying to change behaviour and as policymakers when you're trying to change behaviour by appealing to social norms and social contexts. I will just say something briefly in conclusion before I explode, that the messenger is actually the first letter of Mindspace, but in many ways is probably the most important. I talked about education and information programs. When people put together any form of education and information, they spend a lot of time ensuring that the message is correct. In terms of human interpretation of the message means very little. What's much more significant is the delivery person or channel for the message. Who the messenger is, not the message. And in my experience of public policy makers and increasingly of corporations, they spend no time thinking about who the messenger is. All the time thinking about the message, no time thinking about the messenger. In the Mindspace report, there's still, for me, still the best example of an effective messenger was an intervention in Zimbabwe, which was to give women, young women mostly, information about HIV prevention and condom use that was given to them via their hairdressers. What a genius messenger. That is somebody who you really trust because they've got a pair of scissors over your head. They have authority and expertise. That's the second important characteristic of a messenger. So trust and authority, and significantly similarity. There's someone like them. They weren't a faceless authority banging on about safe sex, right? Trust, expert, similar. If you can find a messenger that has those 3 attributes, you can pretty much get people to do anything. And the message becomes largely irrelevant. All right, 27 seconds. So, where are we? We are in a place where I think, just me, many people think, we should be paying much more attention, being much more serious about understanding the scarcest resource that we all have, which is our time, and thinking about ways in which, as individuals and as policymakers, we can help ourselves and other people use their time in ways that bring them more pleasure, more purpose, and importantly, a better balance between them. The way in which we do that, I haven't exploded, 5 seconds, 10. The way in which we do that is to design environments, contexts, and situations in ways that make it easy for people to do that, and not through trying to change their minds about what they do. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. It's been an honour.